The Alliance leader assumed that the fire at the group's mountain compound had taken the life of his beloved wife, the Alliance director, Selena, but she in fact had faked her death and was escaping with her trusted allies. They were all well aware that what they were doing now was betraying the Alliance. Once they were discovered, according to the rules of the Alliance, every one of them would be sentenced to death. However, none of them would regret it. Everyone who had joined the Alliance had the same feeling of regret aching deep in their bones. The torture caused by the evil pill given to all the Alliance members had made them want to escape, but they never had the chance to do so. After all, the poison of the evil pill would follow them for the rest of their lives. Unless they could somehow break through to level 7 someday, they would never be able to completely get rid of its effects. However, it was different now. Selena had promised them that as long as they could escape from the Alliance, she would be able to find someone to completely remove the poison in their bodies. She would also give them hundreds of thousands of dollars each to start a new life. This sum of money was enough for them to get plastic surgery to change their appearances and give them a chance to start anew, living a completely carefree life once again. Although the Alliance was powerful, its members didn't stretch across the entire country. Moreover, as long as they kept a low profile in the future, they would not give themselves away. The prospect of finding them would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Moreover, the fire at the headquarters had given them a perfect way out. There were so many members of the Alliance. Even if a dozen of them disappeared after the fire with no remains to speak of, no one would notice. They would just assume that their bodies had been burned beyond recognition. They shuttled through the forest for more than an hour before stopping. No matter how high their power bases were, they still needed time to rest. Selena Salem looked like she was about to fall over. Her eyes swept over the dozen or so people around her one by one. Selena Salem wiped the sweat on her forehead and said, "How far are we from the headquarters now?" "About 20 miles, someone replied, before seeming to have seen through Selena's worries and immediately added, "Don't worry, our preparations were very good. Even the Alliance leader couldn't find any flaws in this short period of time. Moreover, we have people following behind who are responsible for removing any trace of our footprints along the way. No matter what, the people at the headquarters won't be able to find any evidence of which way we went." Selena only relaxed a little when she heard this. "So, where are we going next?" One of them had asked the question on many of their minds. Selena seemed stunned at first, but then she quickly thought about it. She did not know the exact location of Kevin at the moment, or to be more accurate, she had never asked. "I heard Shannon Tate say that he is in Washington, D.C., so we should head in that direction first," Selena said hesitantly. Hearing this, the person who had asked the question frowned slightly. "Well, I think there is something that we should all be reminded of before we set off. Washington, D.C. is a dangerous place. Senior members of the Alliance had previously gone to set up a branch there. If we appear suddenly without taking the proper precautions, it is very likely that our whereabouts will be exposed." "Don't worry. I believe that he is definitely there, and the city is very densely populated. We might not be discovered either, even if we walked right past an Alliance member," Selena said before she revealed a smile and said, "As long as we find Kevin, you can all look forward to a brand new life." When these words were said, the rest of the people's faces also revealed wide smiles. Selena raised her head and looked at the horizon. Her face carried a rich smile as she continuously repeated over and over in her heart, "Kevin, I'm coming to find you." Meanwhile, that same evening, Kevin left the Reaper Squad's base and returned to Swan Lake. It took him almost 2 hours to find the formula that Terry Wadford needed in the huge amount of medicinal pills detailed in the secret book. But there was another problem right in front of him. Kevin did not have any of the necessary herbs. After thinking about it, he went to the Smart family's mansion to request all of the herbs needed to refine the pill for Terry. Originally, Kevin wanted to get the herbs and leave, but he did not expect the Smart family to be so generous that they forced him to stay. In the living room, Kevin took a sip of coffee and looked at the two people in front of him. One of them was Alexander Smart, and the other was the current patriarch of the Smart family, Wilhelm Smart. Mr. Smart, with all due respect, if you have something particular you would like to say, can you say it quickly? Terry Watford, the CEO of the Orion Group, is waiting for me to treat him. Kevin said anxiously to Wilhelm Smart. Ah, Mr. Williams, I have heard about Mr. Watford's condition. There aren't any major threats to his life right now. We have enough time to talk. Wilhelm said with a smile as he held his own coffee cup casually. He added, From the looks of it, it's quite clear that Mr. Watford holds a very high position in your heart, though, am I right? I was thinking that if my family were to encounter such a tragedy in the future, would you also be so concerned about it? Wilhelm said as he gave Kevin a deep look. What do you mean by this? Are you doubting my sense of fairness? Kevin frowned slightly and said with an unhappy expression, If that's the case, you can rest assured that I will treat you equally. If the person lying in the hospital was a member of the Smart family, I would also be in such a hurry. Hearing his words, Alexander Smart's expression became somewhat awkward. Although he had a certain amount of authority, it was nothing compared to Wilhelm Smart. As a result, even if he knew that Wilhelm's suggestion might offend Kevin, he could not refute him. Okay, I'm sure that is the case, Wilhelm said as he put down the coffee cup in his hand, and his face suddenly became serious. Mr. Williams, I have another question for you. If you succeed in the future, and I mean truly succeed, how will you give your men credit? Kevin was stunned when he heard this because he had never thought about this before. After all, he was still in the beginning stages of building his empire. Although he did not say outright that he would reach the top, he did not even consider the possibility of failure. However, he was still too far from his goals to be thinking about what he would do after he reached the level of success that he was striving for. Why do you ask that, Mr. Smart? Kevin squinted his eyes and looked at Wilhelm as he asked. Haha, Mr. Williams, you are a smart man. Don't tell me you don't understand what I mean, Wilhelm said slowly. My family has been a prestigious one in this city for many generations. Now we are putting our necks on the line to support you. Should we also not know what your ultimate plans are? Kevin instantly understood. It seemed like Wilhelm's ultimate goal in keeping him here was to negotiate terms. Since you clearly seem to be getting at something specific, why don't you tell me exactly what you have in mind? Kevin took a deep breath and asked. My idea is very simple. You have only just started to build your reputation here in Washington. The enemies you will face in the future will definitely be stronger, so when the final reward comes, how about we judge it by how much each family has contributed to your efforts? Wilhelm said without a change in his expression. Actually, he didn't want to say it so early on in the process. To put it bluntly, it might affect the impression Kevin had of the Smart family. This time, something happened to Terry Watford, and again Kevin had sprung into action. This had caused Wilhelm Smart to be unable to sit still any longer. If he didn't give Kevin some of the Smart family's bargaining chips in advance, how would their voices be heard in the world Kevin was setting out to build? You seem to be implying something, Kevin said as he couldn't help but let out a cold snort. How could he not be worried about the meaning behind Wilhelm Smart's words? After all, the foundation of the Thompson family was mostly in the Midwest, and the results they could achieve in Washington, D.C. were not nearly as much as some of the other families. If the reward was based on how much each family truly contributed, the Thompson family should definitely be ranked at the bottom. Mr. Williams, please don't misunderstand. After all, there are a lot of people in my family. Let me put it somewhat bluntly. This is a bit like raising a dog. If there is enough meat to eat, how can it bite me? Wilhelm said as his expression didn't change in the slightest. It didn't have any effect on him. Mr. Smart, don't worry, Kevin said as he got up and tidied his clothes. He said in a cold tone, the Smart family's taste in coffee is not bad, but it's a pity that it doesn't suit my simpler taste. After saying this, Kevin left. He had already made himself clear enough. Whether Wilhelm Smart could understand it or not was up to him. As soon as Kevin left, Alexander Smart stood defiantly. "Wilhelm, what did you mean just now? Isn't it too early to say these things? If we do it like this, all of our previous efforts might be in vain. Kevin is like a sleeping giant right now. Very few people know what he will be capable of soon. If we can get on good terms with him and stay on good terms with him, we will benefit tremendously. But we cannot afford to become enemies. He will definitely exact revenge on everyone who has wronged him soon enough." Alexander emphasized loudly. "Why are you shouting? I am only your older brother, not your grandfather. You don't have to shout like I'm deaf." Wilhelm looked at his younger brother with great dissatisfaction and reprimanded him. "On behalf of an outsider, why are you speaking to me as disrespectfully as this?" "I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm thinking about the future of our family, big brother. Do you know what Kevin is already capable of? Once Kevin has a grudge, he doesn't let it go. Wouldn't our family lose more than we would gain by testing him?" Alexander roared, his anger still in full force. "So what if the losses outweigh the gains? What if he doesn't get what he wants in the end?" Wilhelm retorted. "Is that what you really think?" Alexander asked as he suddenly calmed down and looked at his older brother in confusion. He was very clear about Wilhelm's personality. He was calm and steady. It was impossible for him to speak to others without knowing when to advance or retreat just because of a small profit. Otherwise, the Smart family would not have existed at the top of DC's power structure for so long. "Don't tell me you haven't noticed. Who is Terry Watford? The CEO of the Orion Group. He is a man with an incredible amount of power, and even so, with everyone well aware that he is on the same side as Kevin, he was almost killed by an assassin just the other day. Do you think that the prestige of the Smart family is higher than that of Terry Watford?" Wilhelm asked in a stern voice. "Are you suggesting the Terry Watford situation wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface?" Alexander said, his expression also becoming serious. Wilhelm lightly nodded his head and said, "Kevin is still too young. No matter how low-key he tries to make himself out to be, he is still too arrogant for his own good. There are some things that cannot be seen clearly on the surface. I believe that Herman Thompson and some of the others must have noticed it, but even so, they did not say a word to Kevin. Have you ever thought about why?" Alexander opened his mouth but did not say a word for a long time, or rather he did not have anything with which to refute his older brother. Wilhelm's right index finger kept tapping on the table, and his face revealed a profound expression as he said, "According to the news that we have received, Kevin has already ruined the Mavericks' plan several times. No matter how good their tempers are, they will not be able to bear it for much longer. Under such circumstances, countless people will end up like Terry Watford in the future." Alexander kept trying to digest what his older brother was saying. The more he thought about it, the more shocked he felt. Kevin had actually gotten the attention of the most powerful people already. To put it more seriously, this was a test for Kevin. However, Herman Thompson and some of the others must have realized this, but why didn't they say anything about it to Kevin? Looking at Wilhelm in front of him, Alexander suddenly felt that his big brother's horizons were much wider than his own. And he knew that Kevin Williams was going to be a pawn in Wilhelm's grand game of chess. Kevin went to the Smart family to get herbs for the pills he was refining to cure Terry Watford. There he was questioned by Wilhelm Smart, the family's leader, who wanted to get a promise from Kevin that once he did achieve his full powers, he would be aligned with the Smart family, a promise Kevin did not make. After leaving the Smart family's mansion, Kevin strolled along the streets. Kevin's brows tightly furrowed and his mind was filled with the words that Wilhelm Smart had said earlier. He knew that someone of Wilhelm's status would make it unusual for him to ask for considerations from Kevin. So why did he ask for them? Suddenly, a thought appeared in Kevin's mind. Could it be that there were some people in some of the families who supported him who actually had ill intentions? How many people who had promised to stand behind him were actually hiding something from him? This time, all sorts of messy thoughts flashed through Kevin's mind. For a moment, he could not figure out what to do. There were only two things Kevin could be sure of. First, in other people's eyes, he was already a Ranger. And second, the Mavericks were his enemy. With such thoughts in mind, Kevin quickly returned to Swan Lake. Under the company of Amanda Perry and the others, Alan and Susan Williams had already returned. After saying a few words to them, Kevin went upstairs to begin refining the pills for Terry Watford. The night passed very quickly. Early in the morning, William Chung and a nurse arrived in Terry Watford's hospital room. After looking over his chart, Dr. Chung turned to the nurse and said pointedly, "You can leave, and also close the door behind you. I just need to perform a checkup for the patient." The nurse was surprised. "Really? Dr. Chung, if you want to do an examination, shouldn't I stay here to help you? What if you need anything from me?" William Chung's tone suddenly became cold. "I said get out of here right now, or I will immediately find a new nurse to help me." The nurse panicked when she heard this. "Dr. Chung, please don't be angry. As long as you don't replace me, I will leave immediately." The nurse left the hospital room after she said that and closed the door behind her. She was new, and she had only just finished nursing school a year ago. It was not easy for her to get a job at such a prestigious hospital. As long as she didn't offend people like Dr. Chung, she would definitely have a bright future. But if she was replaced, it could spell disaster for her. After the nurse left, William was still worried. He went over to the door and checked over and over again that no one was coming. He even locked the door behind him and went back over to the hospital bed. Looking at Terry Watford, whose eyes were tightly closed, William suddenly sighed and said, "Mr. Watford, I'm sorry. I know this is wrong, but after you die, I will promise to come back every year to pay my respects to your grave. And you don't have to worry. I was promised that they wouldn't do anything bad to your family. You can go with peace of mind." After saying that, William slowly stood up and took out a brand new syringe from his pocket. He also took out 2 small bottles of medicine and mixed them together. However, his face suddenly revealed a strong sense of internal struggle. With this needle, Terry Watford would definitely die. He might very possibly die anyway, of course, but with this, William would completely forfeit any sense of medical ethics. He would be a murderer. William had just thought of this when a voice suddenly sounded from the depths of his heart. "You still have time to care about medical ethics? As a doctor, you have already done plenty of unethical things." William's expression instantly became firm. He steadily held the syringe and took Terry's right hand out from under the blanket. He rolled up his sleeve and prepared to inject the medicine into his body. At that moment, the door of the hospital room was suddenly kicked open from outside, startling William so much that the syringe fell to the ground. "What are you doing?" The only person who could have such strength, courage, and care about Terry Watford's life and death was Kevin. "Who are you? How could you barge in here like that?" William asked as his eyes flashed with panic. "Let me ask you again. What are you doing?" Kevin's expression had already turned completely cold. When he saw the syringe on the ground, his brows also knitted tightly. As a doctor, I'm naturally just checking the patient's condition. Why did you come in here? What do you think you're doing?" William stammered. "Check his condition?" Kevin asked in disbelief. "Of course." William took a deep breath and adjusted his emotions. He changed his expression and looked at Kevin. "What's wrong with you? How can you be so arrogant in such an important place as this hospital?" "Why did you tell the nurse to stay outside when you were checking his condition?" Kevin ignored William's explanation and continued to interrogate him. William was a little taken off guard and did not know how to answer. At that moment, a voice came from outside the door. "Dr. Chung, have you finished checking on Mr. Watford? There are still a few other patients waiting for you." Oh, I'll be right there." William called out as he felt lucky in his heart and quickly left the room. Seeing the doctor's panic, Kevin's brows knitted together even more tightly. He bent down and picked up the syringe on the ground. Looking at the medicine inside, Kevin's eyes flashed. But at that moment, William Chung had already left. No matter how many doubts Kevin had in his heart, there was no way he could answer them with any certainty. He could only temporarily hold on to the syringe until he found a way to have it tested. Looking at Terry Watford, whose eyes were still firmly closed, Kevin sighed slightly and removed a blue pill from his pocket. Just as Kevin was about to give it to Terry, a scolding voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Who are you? What are you doing in this room? What are you holding in your hand?" The series of questions made Kevin a little confused. He turned around and saw a middle-aged man about 50 years old walking into the room quickly. "May I ask who you are?" Kevin asked in confusion. "I am the deputy director of this hospital, Alan Joseph. Who are you? And what are you doing in Mr. Watford's room? What's that in your hand?" The man asked with a serious expression. "I'm Mr. Watford's friend. This is a pill I refined for him. I can help him," Kevin started to say. The man forcefully interrupted Kevin's words. "Nonsense. Mr. Watford is a seriously injured patient. He needs to take his time to recover. All the so-called medicinal pills that can bring him back to life are lies. How many people have died in pursuit of these so-called medicinal pills? Do you all have to repeat the same mistake?" His face was solemn as he tried his best to persuade Kevin. The corner of Kevin's mouth twitched. He couldn't figure out where this person had come from. What did he know about Kevin's medicinal pills anyway? "Sir, I think you might have misunderstood. My pill," Kevin started to say. "I know that young people like you don't have much patience, but the safety of the patient is not something you can joke about. If Mr. Watford consumes this pill of yours, if anything happens, not to mention you, even our hospital will not be able to absolve ourselves of the blame," Alan Joseph advised earnestly. After being interrupted twice in a row, Kevin frowned as he started to get annoyed with this man. "Can you let me finish?" Kevin frowned slightly and said, "This pill was personally refined by me last night. It will definitely not have any negative impact on Mr. Watford. If you really have nothing better to do, help me check the medicine in this needle. I just walked in on one of your doctors apparently intending to inject the patient with this." Alan Joseph took the syringe, fiddled with his glasses on the bridge of his nose, and then swept his gaze back and forth between Kevin and Terry Watford. Suddenly, Alan Joseph took a few steps back quickly. Someone is trying to murder Mr. Watford," he stammered loudly. Kevin was stunned when he heard that. His eyes were wide open. More than a dozen security guards rushed in right away and asked Alan what had happened. "It's this man. He wants to murder Mr. Watford," he repeated as he pointed at Kevin and spoke hurriedly. "Wait a minute. I think there's some misunderstanding. What right do you have to say that I want to murder Terry Watford? We are good friends," Kevin exclaimed. You still want to argue? You even presented the evidence yourself," Alan said as he waved the syringe in his hand. "Do you know what this is? If you inject this into Mr. Watford's body, his heart would stop almost instantaneously." "What did you say? So this is poison. Are you sure?" Kevin's face was full of shock. So you still want to put on a show even after the truth is exposed?" Alan Joseph said as he directed the surrounding security guards. "What are you still standing there for? Arrest him immediately." Hey, wait a minute. Give me a chance to explain." Kevin suddenly felt that even if he had 100 mouths, he would not be able to explain himself adequately in the eyes of these people. As he waved his hand, suddenly, he remembered what had happened earlier. He hurriedly said, "This thing isn't even mine. It was dropped by a doctor named William Chung." A hint of disdain flashed across Alan Joseph's eyes. He sneered and said, You wouldn't really dare to frame him, would you? Do you know who William Chung is? He is not only a doctor in my hospital, but he is also the chief surgeon for Mr. Watford and one of the most respected surgeons in the country. Are you saying that Dr. Chung wants to harm his own patient? Why would he do such a thing?" If what you said is true, then why on earth would Dr. Chung do everything in his power to save Mr. Watford's life during a very lengthy surgery when he was first brought into this hospital? Alan Joseph's words made sense. At least before he figured out the situation, Kevin did not know how to refute it. What? Cat got your tongue? Alan Joseph said as he looked at Kevin with a sneer and said, "Arrest him." As soon as he finished speaking, a dozen security guards slowly moved toward Kevin. All of them were alert and did not dare to be careless. They were afraid that Kevin would do something sudden to harm Terry Watford before they were able to restrain him. I said it was just a misunderstanding. The person who wanted to harm Mr. Watford was not me, but William Chung. Why don't you all believe me? Kevin said helplessly. Also, I advise you not to do anything. After all, you don't know the truth. It's understandable. Please, don't force me to do anything. You would still dare to make a move? I advise you to surrender calmly. Our hospital's security guards are all professionals. As long as you don't resist, you will not be physically harmed, Alan Joseph said. What Kevin didn't know was that the hospital had 4 deputy directors. During this period of time, the hospital director was preparing to retire and was in the process of choosing a successor. Originally, Alan Joseph was considered the one with the least hope among the 4. But now it was all different. He believed that he had caught the murderer who wanted to kill Terry Watford. The fact that Terry Watford was the CEO of the Orion Group would certainly help his cause. I said that I am not the murderer. You are wasting your time here with me. The real murderer is William Chung, Kevin said as his face turned gloomy. He understood that these people did not know the truth, but it was another matter for Alan Joseph to completely ignore him. You are the real murderer. The reason why you are saying that is to lure us away so you can make a run for it. I have seen through your little trick a long time ago, Alan Joseph said with a confident smile. Give me a chance to explain who I am and you'll realize that you've misunderstood this entire situation, Kevin shouted. He had completely lost his patience. He took a step forward with his right foot and a powerful pressure was released from his body. Almost in an instant, the few bodyguards closest to him were all blown backward. Alan Joseph was completely shocked. Before anyone could even make a sound, the rest of them were also sent flying backward. Luckily, Kevin deliberately controlled his pressure so that Terry Watford, who was still unconscious in the hospital bed, was not affected at all. The doctors and nurses in the hallway looked at the dozen or so people who flew out of the hospital room in surprise. For a moment, they did not know what had happened to them. How dare you? Alan Joseph cried out as he stood up with the help of 2 bodyguards. He pointed at Kevin and shouted, You are a dead man. How dare you attack me after you attempted to commit murder? You're going to prison. This is your own fault for refusing to listen to my explanation. There is no one to blame but yourself. Kevin arrived at Terry Watford's hospital room just in time to stop Dr. William Chung from poisoning him. But after throwing Chung out of the room, a hospital director, Alan Joseph, arrived and accused Kevin of trying to kill Terry. Unable to convince Joseph of the error, Kevin had to use his power to repel Joseph and security guards, who were intent on handing him over to the police. Kevin originally thought that William Chung was really examining Terry Watford as he had claimed, but now it seemed clear that he had been bribed by Terry's enemies to kill him. In addition, Kevin didn't want to waste too much time with Alan Joseph. After all, he was just the deputy director, but he didn't expect this person to be so stupid that he wouldn't listen to him. Kevin couldn't help but want to teach him a lesson. Just as Kevin was thinking about this, Alan Joseph suddenly stood up and shouted, This person wanted to kill Terry Watford, but I exposed him. Then not only did he not cooperate with our hospital security, but he even dared to hit us. Everyone, don't let him leave easily. After saying that, Alan Joseph limped away. Looking at the crowd gathered in the hallway, Kevin glanced at them again. At that moment, the dozen or so security guards who were looking at him with fear sighed and hoped to leave safely. Before he could even take a few steps, 2 young men suddenly stood up and blocked his way. Is there anything I can help you with? Kevin demanded of them. Of course there is. The deputy director said you were an attempted murder suspect. Now you want to leave? The young man said in a cold voice. Then what do you want? Kevin sneered and asked. Of course, I want to bring you to justice. How can I let someone like you run amok in broad daylight? The young man said righteously. His words immediately attracted the praise of the surrounding people. Don't let him go. We've got your back, someone said. People like him should be sent to prison. We're all going to stand in his way. I don't believe that he would dare to make a move against all of us, the second person shouted. Hearing this, Kevin almost couldn't hold back his laughter. Staring at the man in front of him, he said, I have already told your boss that it was just a misunderstanding. So please, don't meddle in my business. I have things to deal with and I have no time to waste with you. Who the hell do you think you are? The man said righteously. He added, if it's like you say and this was all just a misunderstanding, why did you attack us earlier? Why did you try to leave in such a hurry? Why didn't you wait for the people of the Orion Group to come so you could explain things to them? You have a sharp tongue, Kevin shook his head and said. I will tell you one last time. I am not the murderer. If you continue to keep me here, don't blame me for what happens to you next. Oh, I don't believe you would dare to do anything to us. The man raised his chin in disdain and stared at Kevin. But Kevin suddenly punched him. However, he controlled his strength well and did not knock him out. A strong pain radiated across his abdomen, and the man curled up on the ground. His face was flushed red and the blood vessels on his forehead also popped up. Who are you? The man raised his head in disbelief and struggled to speak. Do I have to tell you in advance before hitting you? Kevin snorted and said. At that moment, a path separated the crowd. Through it stepped William Chung, who had just finished checking his other patients. When he saw the scene in front of him, his expression changed. What are you doing? The hospital is not a place for you to fight. Dr. Chung reprimanded them harshly. I've been looking for you. Kevin's face turned cold. He no longer paid any attention to the young man in front of him and walked straight toward William Chung. What do you want from me? William panicked and several thoughts quickly flashed through his mind. Could it be that he already knows about the poison? He thought to himself. He quickly shook off this thought, thinking to himself, that shouldn't be the case. The compound I used is very obscure. If I hadn't practiced medicine for more than 10 years, I wouldn't be able to recognize it at all. William also didn't know for sure whether Kevin had recognized the poison or not, but he definitely held in his hand the syringe that he had dropped. Eventually, he would be able to find out. As a result, William's heart was in a state of complete panic. This was the CEO of the Orion Group whom he was suspected of trying to kill after all. If the matter was really made known to the public, the people of the Orion Group would surely have him killed. Looking at William Chung, who was slowly retreating, the smile on Kevin's face became even wider. What's wrong, Dr. Chung? What are you afraid of? Kevin asked with a sneer. Before William could answer, a few more people stood up to protect him, staring at Kevin fearlessly. With us here today, don't even think about hurting Dr. Chung, one of them said with all of his energy. These people had all been treated very well by William Chung, so they all felt that they owed it to him. This sudden action had completely stunned Kevin. He had never thought that William Chung would actually have gained so much support from so many people. At that moment, a thought suddenly crossed Kevin's mind. Could it be that he really misunderstood? Could Dr. Chung just have been checking on Terry Watford after all, and the medication in the syringe was actually for some other patient? William Chung was stunned for a moment before he quickly came back to his senses. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, but he covered it up very well. Please don't be impulsive, everyone. I completely understand how this gentleman might have misunderstood the situation, William Chung said. Still, no one backed down from their support of William Chung. Hearing these calm words, Kevin felt more and more confused. William Chung was overjoyed in his heart, but on the surface he looked somber before he spoke again, saying, Thank you for your understanding, everyone. Please don't make things too difficult for him. I still have things to deal with, so I'll leave now. Where do you think you're going? Kevin said, wanting to stop him. Regardless of whether he had misunderstood or not, he had to catch William Chung and investigate him thoroughly. "What do you want? Unless you kill all of us, don't even think about getting past us and hurting Dr. Chung," one of the security guards warned. A few of them stood side by side in the hallway, stretching out their arms to block Kevin, who was about to make a move. No one noticed William Chung, who had just walked past the crowd and out of their sight. The corner of his mouth was slightly raised. He had already thought about all of this in his mind. Anyway, the money had already been transferred to the account linked to his debit card. No matter what, he would have enough money to take care of Cheryl's situation. They could completely start over. About 10 minutes had passed, but Kevin still could not convince the people surrounding him. He felt helpless. He could not possibly start a fight with all of these people, could he? The people from the Orion group came very quickly. They also brought 2 police officers along with him. "Here he is." Alan Joseph pushed the crowd aside and pointed at Kevin, shouting, "He wanted to kill Terry Watford earlier, but I managed to stop him." When he said this, Alan straightened his back as if he had done something heroic. "Mr. Williams?" One of the people from the Orion group said in surprise as he looked at Kevin, then he turned around and looked at Alan Joseph. "Deputy Director Joseph, are you sure you're right about this?" "Of course. I saw it with my own eyes." Alan Joseph shook his head a few times and said. After hearing the answer, the man took a deep breath and turned back to look at Kevin. "Mr. Williams, please, can you give me a reasonable explanation?" "What is there to explain? The person who wanted to kill Terry Watford was not me, but Dr. Chung from this very hospital. If I'm not wrong, he should have run away from here by now. Why don't you go and see if you're able to find him?" Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest and said. When his voice fell, the surrounding people who had yet to leave started to scold Kevin. "What do you mean? You're a sitting duck and yet you refuse to admit defeat. Is that it? You still want to try and frame Dr. Chung?" one of the people said. "Do you know how amazing Dr. Chung is? How can you possibly say such things about him?" Another sneered at him. 2 police officers walked up to Kevin and said, "Mr. Williams, we're going to have to ask you to please come with us. We'll need to take your statement back at the station." "I'm sorry, I have far more urgent matters to attend to, but I can tell you that you're wasting your time. Just go and find Dr. Chung immediately," Kevin said slowly as he ignored the people around him. The 2 police officers looked at each other. One of them shook his head lightly and took out the silver handcuffs from behind his back. "Sir, please cooperate and come with us," he pleaded. Seeing this, the surrounding people all revealed proud smiles. Regardless of whether they were protecting Dr. Chung or not, as ordinary people, they would be sincerely happy to see a criminal being brought to justice. After all, society would have 1 fewer bad guys on the street today. "I think you have no right to take me away." Kevin did not even look at the handcuffs. Instead, he took out a small booklet and threw it toward the 2 police officers. The 2 police officers looked at the contents of the booklet and their expressions changed. They quickly stood up and stared at Kevin. "Sir," both of them muttered at the same time. Kevin casually took the book back and then put it away. "I told you that you are not qualified to take me away." He was not joking with them. The status of the Reaper Squad was far too high. Not to mention them, even their leaders would not dare to be impudent to Kevin. "Sir, you still need to give us an explanation for all of this. Otherwise, we cannot give," one of the men started to say. "I have already told you just now. Go and investigate Dr. Chung," Kevin said, refusing to continue to pay attention to the 2 of them. Instead, he turned to Mark Turner, who had only just arrived, and asked, "Why are you here?" Although he was not all that familiar with Mark Turner, the person who would be expected to temporarily take charge of the company after Terry Watford's injury was definitely not an ordinary person. However, after hearing about Terry's accident, Mark Turner actually rushed over. He was very concerned about Terry Watford's condition. It even seemed that Mark Turner's concern was a little too much. He did not seem to be asking about what it would take for Terry Watford to make a full recovery, but rather what it would take for him to die from his injuries. As Kevin was still being held at the hospital, insisting that someone investigate William Chung, some representatives from the Orion Group arrived. Mark Turner was with them, and although Kevin didn't know him that well, he was well aware that this was the man who would take over the company in Terry Watford's absence. However, Mark Turner didn't seem to be concerned with Terry making a recovery, but rather with what might make him die. In fact, Kevin had his suspicions. Now that something had harried to Terry Watford so soon, Marcus Watford was clearly not yet prepared to take the reins. Under such circumstances, the only one in the company who would be able to take over at the company was Mark Turner. He could use this opportunity to take control of the entirety of the Orion Group in the long term.
If something happened to Mr. Watford, as a senior director of the company, I should come and take care of the situation.
Mark Turner replied as if it was only natural. The company still needs you. Go back there. I am here. Kevin gave a firm order as soon as he opened his mouth. Mark Turner opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, but in the end he could not say a word. He simply turned around and left the hospital. Soon, the two policemen who had gone to the office to investigate Dr. Chung returned.
Sir, I did not see anyone there. I have contacted the police. We found out that half an hour ago William Chung's account had a tremendous windfall and our people have already gone to his home to investigate.
A police officer reported truthfully. Before Kevin could ask any questions, another person immediately added,
We just received news that William Chung's phone is disconnected and the BMW under his name has been sold.
Seems like he is ready to escape. Kevin touched his chin and said with a sneer, You should have listened to me when I told you to go find him sooner.
Don't worry, sir. We will find him,
one of them answered seriously. Kevin nodded his head lightly and let the two of them go back to the station. After that, he went back to Terry's hospital room. He looked at the hospital bed. Kevin's eyes narrowed. If the people from the secluded valley attacked him, then would the attack on Terry be the work of the secluded valley too? After thinking about it, Kevin called Jordan Black and asked him to find a few reliable people to come over. From that day onward, he had to arrange some security forces. Kevin had just finished arranging Terry Watford's matters when he received a call from Stanley Cooper.
Come over here. I have something to discuss with you right away,
Stanley Cooper said concisely.
It's about the relationship between the Mavericks and the secluded valley.
Hearing this, Kevin felt a mental jolt. He let Jordan Black stay behind and guard the place. He then left the hospital and went to the Reaper Squad's base alone. Kevin was now very familiar with the Reaper Squad's base. When Stanley Cooper saw Kevin, a smile immediately appeared on his face.
It's been 2 hours and now you finally arrived?
There was a traffic jam, Kevin explained. Why did you call me here in such a hurry anyway?
Matthew Thames wants to see you,
Stanley Cooper said over his shoulder as he turned around and walked toward the interior of the base.
I will tell you in advance that you must be mentally prepared.
What do you mean? Kevin asked with a slight frown.
According to the information I received, it might be because a certain research lab in a small town was destroyed. The Mavericks might have made a big move on you. I think Mr. Thames must have called you here to discuss the matter,
Stanley Cooper said as he gave Kevin a look that said he was on his own. Kevin did not give any reply. He simply followed Stanley Cooper to Matthew Thames's office. So, why did you ask me to come here? Kevin sat down and asked Matthew directly without taking time for any small talk. Matthew Thames waved to Stanley Cooper, signaling him to leave first. After that, he sighed and slowly shook his head as he looked at Kevin. I received the news 3 hours ago. They're here. The Blood Wolf and Blood Leopard of the secluded valley have already died in my hands. It seems like they've really gotten angry and sent some of the others after me. Kevin raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, I should warn you that their methods are extremely cruel and unpredictable, and we haven't even found any definite traces of them. Matthew Thames took a sip of coffee and said, So what do you suggest? Kevin slightly lowered his head and said with a slight frown on his face, Well, there is another thing besides that. Matthew Thames smacked his lips and said, There is a great opportunity in front of you. What do you mean? Kevin asked curiously. Do you want to enter the upper realm? Matthew Thames stared into Kevin's eyes and asked with a serious expression. "What did you say?" Kevin's expression changed. He subconsciously stood up from his chair. His face was filled with disbelief. The upper realm was like the ceiling of the world of experts. Only by going there would he be able to see the true height of the most powerful experts alive. Many of the experts that dominated other places could only be seen as ants crawling around harmlessly on the ground, compared with the world of the upper realm. "I'm not joking with you." Matthew Thames hesitated and then said guiltily, "In the end, I can only say that I broke my promise. I wanted you to help me investigate the Mavericks' experiments. I promised you that I would guarantee your safety. But now the Mavericks are moving too fast. They actually want to use the powers of the upper realm to get rid of you. Does this mean that the arrival of the secluded valley this time has something to do with the Mavericks?" Kevin instantly thought of the relationship between the two. "You can think of it that way," Matthew Thames replied faintly. "How do we enter the upper realm?" Kevin asked without even considering the consequences. "Have you not heard anything about it?" Matthew Thames did not answer his question immediately. "If you have something to say, just say it. There is no need to beat around the bush with me." Kevin wasn't in the mood to waste any time. Only now did Matthew Thames briefly narrate what had happened in the past 2 days. The night Alan and Susan Williams arrived in Washington, the Mavericks had launched several assassination attempts aimed at Kevin. Apart from the first assassination attempt being resolved by Kevin himself on the way back from the airport, the rest were all handled by the Reaper Squad. Although there was no conclusive evidence in his hands, it was almost certain that the Blood Bear and the Blood Ape sent by the secluded valley had been hired by the Mavericks. "What if I don't want to take on this fight?" Kevin asked with an ugly expression. "Then you can only leave Washington, D.C., and you will never be able to return," Matthew Thames said with a solemn expression. "Why? I didn't do a single thing to offend them here in Washington, D.C., Kevin related. "Because they are the ones in power, and you can only be considered as a threat to the established order. This is the reason why people don't pick fights with government officials," Matthew Thames said. His words showed that he was, in a way, cornered as well by the secluded valley and its assassins. Kevin was frustrated. When he most needed help and protection, it seemed like Matthew Thames and the Reaper Squad were going to abandon him. "You just pushed me out to be the Reaper Squad's shield," Kevin sneered and shook his head twice. He looked at Matthew Thames and said, "Didn't you say that you would ensure my safety? Now you have no intention of keeping your promise?" At that moment, Kevin's heart was full of grief and anger. He had charged into the war on the front line. He turned his head to look behind him, and the Reaper Squad sold him out without even a second thought. I totally agree with you." Matthew Thames didn't have much right to continue facing Kevin. Kevin felt a sense of anger burning in his heart. Who else could he blame for today's situation? Putting aside the fact that no one would support him, would Kevin alone have the strength to go it alone? Still, if he had to blame someone, deep down he knew that he could only blame himself for being too trusting. It was still because he was too virtuous that he had boarded Matthew Thames' ship. As a result, the favorable impression he had toward Matthew Thames had now vanished completely. "I heard that there is an ancient ruin at the bottom of Lake Erie. If you can bring back something with sufficient benefits to compensate for the losses suffered by the Mavericks, then my understanding is that they can let bygones be bygones," Matthew Thames hurriedly explained. Kevin looked at him with a strange expression on his face. Was it worth leaving D.C. to go on another grail hunt that perhaps would end with failure, all to save himself from the secluded valley? Something that the Reaper Squad promised Kevin that they would do, though now they had betrayed him? Kevin's future had never looked this bleak. Just as Kevin had arranged for his men to guard Terry Watford at the hospital, Stanley Cooper called, urging him to meet Matthew Thames at the Reaper Squad's base immediately. Upon arriving, Matthew revealed that the Reaper Squad had stopped several assassin groups on the same night that Kevin encountered while driving his parents home from the airport. But after discovering that the Mavericks had hired the secluded valley for the job, the Reaper Squad's hands were tied, and Kevin now had to face them in the upper realm alone, or be forced to leave Washington. Amidst Kevin's dismay over this, Matthew shared that the Mavericks were willing to end their conflict if he retrieved something for them in Lake Erie, and offered the Reaper Squad support for this mission. "I think we should just forget about our arrangement. Helping the Reaper Squad with its affairs has caused more harm than good. And if I let you guys protect me again this time, you might suddenly have some other tricks up your sleeve that I'll regret later on." Kevin didn't even want to look at Matthew Thames. He continued, asking, "Besides, let me ask you a question. So what if I succeed with the mission? Won't the other people of the Upper Realm come after me when I enter?" "Don't worry. The Reaper Squad has some connections in the Upper Realm. The Mavericks also agreed that as long as you are able to help them with this, you will obtain an official qualification card to enter the Upper Realm. Beyond that, you can rest assured that no matter what happens, we will definitely not stand by and watch." Matthew tried his best to ease Kevin's concerns. How do I know that I can still trust you?" Kevin scowled. "Please, give me one last chance to prove myself to you," Matthew promised as he gave Kevin a sincere look. Hearing this, Kevin sighed. What exactly do the Mavericks want me to find? Deep down, he knew that he didn't really have much of a choice, so he wanted to know his mission before heading back to prepare as soon as possible. Since Matthew Thames said that completing this mission would be enough to guarantee his entry into the Upper Realm, it could only prove that there really was something truly valuable within the ancient ruins at the bottom of Lake Erie. "It's a sky-dividing flower," Matthew revealed immediately. Due to the guilt in his heart, he could tell what Kevin was thinking without saying anything. They're really picky. Kevin couldn't help but complain. Having previously read about the sky-dividing flower in the secret book, it was said to possess miraculous benefits, but it didn't specify what these were. "All right, I will find a time to set off and find it. But remember, my trust in the Reaper Squad is hanging by a thread, so I hope that you will not give me any more problems to deal with when the time comes. Otherwise, don't blame me for burning bridges when I come back." Upon saying this, Kevin left the office as Matthew could only watch him helplessly. After walking out of the Reaper Squad's base, Kevin raised his head and narrowed his eyes as he looked at the gloomy sky. Thinking about Matthew Thames's words, he had given enough hints to make it obvious that the Mavericks still wanted him to die one way or another. Still, he restrained himself from saying anything earlier as he had yet to come up with a plan. For now, Kevin did not want to think about it too much. Anyway, he still had some time to figure it out later. Coincidentally, Lake Erie happened to be just a few hours away from Chicago, so this mission would give him a chance to see Lily again, as well as to check on other matters that he had left behind in Chicago. After returning to Swan Lake, he told his parents and the others about this. When they found out, his parents did not say anything other than to ask him to return safely. Meanwhile, when Troy Evans, Dustin Newman, and the others heard about this mission, they all grew very excited at the chance to step outside of Swan Lake once again. Given this, Dustin was the first to stand up and suggest loudly, "Mr. Williams, you should bring me along with you this time. After all, Troy already accompanied you before. I should be the one to go with you this time." Although Barry Damon did not say anything, the look in his eyes also indicated the same thoughts. At the same time, Amanda Perry and Violet Sweeney sat by the window and quietly waited for Kevin's instructions. Kevin knew that each was eager to accompany him on his next quest, and that choosing one would surely upset the others. "I know that all of you want to go, but this time I have decided to bring Marcus and Kyle with me to Chicago. The rest of you must stay here in Washington to protect my parents. If you have time, you may also help out at the school. I will come back as soon as I can." Kevin addressed everyone, then turned to Kyle Thompson and Marcus Watford. "You two get ready. I will ask Tyler to arrange a flight for us. We will leave Washington by tonight." "Yes, Mr. Williams." Both Kyle and Marcus replied at the same time. The two of them knew very well why Kevin did this. Regardless of whether it was Amanda Perry or any of the others, the rest of the Vanguard's experts had a higher power base than either of them. The reason why Kevin chose to bring them along over the others was to broaden their horizons as new experts. Anyway, with Kevin's foundation in Chicago, he had access to all of the resources that they needed, so there was nothing for the two of them to worry about. Back in Chicago, Lily and the others were gathered together in a private wing of the hospital. After 2 days of treatment, Emo Squire's condition hadn't improved, and in fact it had even worsened. "Dr. Willow, is there really no other way to treat him?" Gilbert Rhodes covered his mouth with his hand and uttered as he tried his best to hold back his tears. "To be honest, I have never seen a situation this bad before. At this point, perhaps only high-grade medicinal pills can save him." Serafina Willow replied with some guilt. At the moment, she was also getting a little misty-eyed. After all, as Emo's chief surgeon, she had been responsible for ensuring his recovery. Unfortunately, she felt like she had exhausted all of her treatment options. However, upon hearing this, Gilbert seemed to have found a glimmer of hope. He then excitedly turned around and asked, "Are you serious? A medicinal pill can really save Emo?" "Yes, but don't get your hopes up. To refine a high-grade medicinal pill that could cure Mr. Squire's condition, you will have to find an elite herbalist. Even if you do, you might not be able to find the complete set of medicinal ingredients in time." Serafina spoke truthfully. In her mind, if the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch was still here, things might be different. But without them, where would they find an elite herbalist on such short notice? "There is someone who can help us. Kevin!" Gilbert exclaimed. He then was about to take out his phone, but was stopped by Adriana Wright. "We can't call Kevin. If he finds out about what happened to Emo, he will surely come back right away to try to save him. But at the same time, all of his hard work in D.C. will be in vain." Adriana reminded him with a serious expression. Among their circle, with Mitchell Cook gone, Adriana Wright's influence was second to none. Hence, she knew the situation in Washington much better than Gilbert and the others. Given this, she understood very well that Kevin's situation there was not as simple or easy as Lily and the others thought. "So what? Is his career really more important than Emo's life?" Gilbert asked in disbelief. In his heart, he had always felt that a person's life was the most important thing that one should treasure. Even with a setback to one's career, it was always possible to recover in the future. But a person's death could not be reversed. Furthermore, putting aside his personal feelings, the reason why Emo Squire had ended up like this in the first place was because of Kevin's conflict with Dalton Steele. As such, it would only be right for Kevin to rush back to Chicago and save his good friend and business associate. "Gilbert, I completely understand where you're coming from, but his current situation is much more complicated than you think. If Kevin rushed back here, not only would he potentially lose everything that he has built in Washington, but it is also very likely that his own life would be put at risk. If that really happens and Kevin dies, wouldn't this all have been for nothing?" Adriana tried her best to convince him, but her face was also full of worry. Not worry for herself, but worry for Kevin's life. With Lake Erie being just a couple of hours away from Chicago, Kevin decided to check on Lily and the others first before heading out on his mission. Meanwhile, Emo Squire's condition seemed to have taken a turn for the worse. Having exhausted all treatment options, his surgeon, Serafina Willow, helplessly suggested that only a high-grade medicinal pill could save Emo. Upon hearing this, Gilbert Rhodes immediately thought of calling Kevin, but was stopped by Adriana Wright, who warned him that doing so would risk jeopardizing all of Kevin's efforts in Washington and his life. What Adriana Wright said was true. At this moment, Kevin was in Washington, where he had already had to face countless enemies. If he returned to Chicago, he would be hunted down and attacked by several enemies here as well. If worst came to worst, Not only would his efforts in D.C. be in vain, but even his foundation in Chicago would be affected. Looking at the unconscious Emo Squire, Gilbert Rhodes's heart was filled with helplessness. At the same time, Adriana Wright and the others all had the same uneasy expressions on their faces. After all, none of them wanted anything bad to happen to either Kevin or Emo. Seeing Adriana and Gilbert gradually turn silent, Lily sighed and said, "Emo must be saved. I will call him." This immediately attracted everyone's attention. Adriana tried to stop her. "Mrs. Williams, you can't. Kevin can't." But before she could finish her sentence, Lily immediately interrupted. "Listen to me. Let's not talk about the relationship between the two of them. The fact is that Emo only suffered his injuries because of the Williams Company, so Kevin must come back and help treat him." She then added, "Besides, even if the worst-case scenario in Washington really happened, it can only mean that he is not as good as the others. Moreover, if he can't even protect and help his friends, then what's the use of having such great power?" When she said this, Lily appeared to be very calm. There was not even the slightest change in her eyes or facial expression. Just as Adriana wanted to say something, a voice suddenly sounded from outside the door.
Wow, it's really rare to see so many important people gathered together. Looks like Emo Squire holds a very special place in your hearts.
Everyone turned their heads and saw Dalton Steele and Ethan Williams, who had just arrived at the door. Adriana Wright and the other bodyguards quickly surrounded them as she stared at the men. Although the two came alone, everyone knew that these bodyguards were not a threat to a powerful expert like Dalton. However, when Gilbert came back to his senses, he suddenly wanted to charge forward at the two of them himself. Fortunately, Adriana managed to step in front of him in time. With Gilbert and Emo being such close friends, he was obviously overcome by anger and did not consider the consequences.
"Mr. Rhodes, you seem quite happy to see me. When did our relationship become so good?"
Dalton remarked with some sarcasm as he revealed a cold smile.
"What the hell are you doing here, Dalton? We all know that this is all your fault. One day I will kill you with my own bare hands."
Gilbert roared back.
Are you sure that you have the ability? In your dreams,
Dalton sneered. "Don't be so arrogant to think that no one can deal with you just because Kevin isn't here right now. Besides, if he comes back and finds out about this, he will definitely not let you go," Adriana scolded. Hearing this, Ethan Williams suddenly snorted.
"Kevin? Do you think that he can even come back here to defend you? He will probably be killed in Washington long before that happens. As for you guys, if it wasn't for that piece of trash stealing my family's money to help you start your businesses, would you even reach a fraction of your current status?"
In Ethan's eyes, Gilbert Rhodes and the others had only become what they were today because of Kevin's help, when he was still part of the Williams family. In short, without the Williams family, they were nothing. So no matter how prominent their status was today, they were forever just beggars in his eyes. Adriana Wright took a deep breath. "Mr. Williams, you are mistaken. Kevin might have helped us out, but he also used his own personal savings, so please don't attribute any of our successes to your family. Also, Emo needs to rest now. He can't be disturbed by anyone. If the two of you are only here to make fun of us, then your goal has been achieved. Please don't waste any more of our time." Although Adriana and Gilbert were now seen as vastly superior to others, they were still far from being on the same level as Dalton Steele, or even Ethan Williams, who belonged to the most powerful family in New York City.
"Do you think you can send us away with just a few polite words?"
Ethan's face was full of ridicule as he continued.
"Besides, I don't think Emo Squire needs to rest. Given that he doesn't have many days to live anyway, wouldn't he be more at peace if he died even earlier?"
Gilbert Rhodes was about to explode again when he heard this. Fortunately, Adriana Wright remained level-headed and was there to calm him down. As Ethan's gaze fell on Lily, a leering look suddenly flashed across his eyes. He then licked his lips and uttered, I never understood why you married that piece of trash cousin of mine." "Why is that? Kevin is a wonderful man and a loving husband. It seems that you are threatened by his existence," Lily replied fearlessly.
I didn't expect you to be such a sharp-tongued woman,"
Ethan scoffed and added.
"Anyway, once the Williams Company falls, Kevin's glory days in Chicago will be finished. On top of that, he will likely be played to death in Washington soon. So you should think of a way out for yourself while you still can. Seeing how pretty you are, I will give you a chance. As long as you spend the night with me tonight, I guarantee that you will still live a life of luxury and wealth after Kevin's death."
Hearing this, Dalton frowned slightly and looked at Ethan with a hint of disgust in his eyes. At the same time, Lily was appalled by this as she sniffed. "You're so pathetic. Kevin is many times the man that you are. Don't you dare think that you can compare yourself to him." Ethan's smile froze as soon as she finished. He then narrowed his eyes at Lily and warned,
"Don't be so arrogant. Kevin is not with you right now, so if I wanted to do something to you, no one would be able to stop me."
As soon as he finished speaking, the faces of the bodyguards at the door changed drastically. They then quickly rushed to surround Dalton and Ethan. With their hands on their waists, they were obviously going to take out their weapons.
Just a few of you?"
Ethan grunted without even looking at these people. After all, he was an expert now. Although his power base was not high, dealing with these bodyguards who were just ordinary people would not be an issue at all. "If you say one more word of disrespect against me or my husband, I don't mind teaching you a lesson," Lily threatened as she tried her best to put on a brave face.
"Is that so? Then I really want to see you try. Why are you so resistant anyway? Has that piece of trash ever made you feel completely safe and loved? Today I'm in a good mood, so I will show you what a real man is like."
As Ethan spoke, he stretched out his hand toward Lily. "Get him out of here right now," Adriana ordered her bodyguards. But before her bodyguards could react, a strong pressure was released from Dalton's body, restraining everyone in the room and making them unable to move a finger. "Dalton, what are you doing?" Adriana and Ethan almost uttered at the same time.
"We are only here to visit Emo Squire, so stop messing around. If you want to have some fun, go back to New York. This is not a place where you can do whatever you want,"
Dalton rebuked as he furrowed his brows at Ethan.
"You mean you want to protect Lily? Dalton, don't forget that she is Kevin's wife. If we take her with us today, Kevin will definitely regret it for the rest of his life,"
Ethan argued. Ethan had always been full of resentment towards Kevin. Ever since he was young, he had been viewed as a useless person compared to Kevin. Even among the members of the Williams family, not many of his relatives were that fond of him. This was especially the case with his father, Thomas. Deep down, he knew that he would never be able to surpass whatever Kevin had accomplished so far. But with Lily right in front of him at this moment, Ethan wanted to take out all of his grievances over the years on her.
"I know what I'm doing. Furthermore, I can assure you that if you lay a finger on Lily today, the entire Williams family will not be able to protect you,"
Dalton cautioned in a stern tone.
Ethan roared disapprovingly. "Are you trying to scare me?
But before he could finish, a voice came from outside the door. "If you aren't scared, well then you should be." Everyone was dumbfounded at first, but when they turned around to see who it was, their expressions changed drastically. Lily and the others looked pleasantly surprised, while Dalton and Ethan were frozen in shock. Kevin, alongside Kyle Thompson and Marcus Watford, quickly walked in with a serious expression on his face. At the same time, his spiritual energy became stronger with every step that he took. Although it was subtle, this easily overpowered the pressure that Dalton had been emitting. "Kevin!" Adriana and Gilbert both called out excitedly. At the same time, Lily did not say anything, but her hand started to shake as her eyes were fixed on Kevin. Meanwhile, Dalton's expression became serious as he observed Kevin vigilantly, but in contrast, Ethan's legs started to tremble as if he had just seen a ghost. "I'm back." Kevin said gently as he walked straight toward Lily. Left speechless by this, tears instantly fell from Lily's eyes. After 3 seconds, she then hugged Kevin and buried her head in his chest. She sobbed uncontrollably, as if she wanted to release all of the negative emotions that she had been keeping to herself. Kevin comforted her gently. I know that things have been hard on you in my absence, but for now, I need you to be strong while I take care of this matter, okay? Then we can go home and talk about everything. After some time, Lily finally managed to restrain her emotions enough to raise her head at Kevin and respond. Thank you. After using his hand to wipe the tears off of her face, Kevin kissed her forehead and rubbed her shoulder. But when he turned around to face Ethan, the smile on his face quickly disappeared and was replaced by a cold gaze.
Kevin, why did you come back all of a sudden? We didn't hear anything about your return,
Ethan uttered with his eyes filled with fear. Ever since Kevin barged into the Williams family's mansion and sent him flying with a single move, that incident had left a deep fear in Ethan's heart, as if it summed up all those years of being overshadowed by him. Do I need to ask for your permission first? Kevin replied and then added, I have tried my best not to cause trouble for the Williams family, but you seem to have a death wish by disrupting my affairs in Chicago. Are you just stupid, or did you really think that I wouldn't find out? Looking at the sneer on Kevin's face, Ethan took a few steps back. It was not until he touched the wall that he realized that he no longer had anywhere to go. Seeing the scene in front of him, Dalton shook his head disapprovingly. He couldn't believe that Ethan was actually this afraid of Kevin. Ethan, let me ask you, what were you about to say earlier? He asked coldly. If I didn't come back today, what were you planning to do with my wife and my friends? With Ethan momentarily at a loss for words, Gilbert Rhodes could not help but blurt out, Kevin, you must teach them a lesson. It was because of the two of them that Emo ended up like this. Upon hearing this, Kevin frowned. After taking a glance at Emo and seeing him lying unconscious in the hospital bed, he turned his attention back to Ethan and said, Looks like you finally grew a pair. You actually dared to do such a thing to my friend?
So what if I did? And even if I wanted to take your wife, what can you do? Don't forget that at the end of the day, you are still just the same useless person who was expelled from the Williams family. If you dare to touch a single strand of my hair, the entire family will never let you go for it.
Ethan furiously retorted. Given the huge gap between their power bases, Ethan knew that he was clearly no match for Kevin. So if he wanted to walk out of the hospital alive, he ultimately had to rely on Dalton's strength for protection. Otherwise, he would certainly die today. Lily decided to ask Kevin to return to Chicago to save Emo, but before she could call him, Dalton Steele and Ethan Williams burst in and terrorized the group. Ethan then turned his attention to Lily, trying to convince her to leave Kevin for him. When Lily firmly rejected him, Ethan threatened to forcefully take her away. This drew Dalton's ire, causing an argument between the two of them. Suddenly, Kevin arrived with Kyle Thompson and Marcus Watford, shocking everyone. After reassuring Lily, he then confronted Ethan. While Ethan arrogantly faced him, he knew deep down that only Dalton had the strength to save him from Kevin's wrath. Do you seriously think that I wouldn't dare to lay a finger on you just because of our family? Kevin snorted as he walked up to Ethan. Then I will prove you wrong today. Before Ethan could react, Kevin grabbed his hair and dragged him over to the other side of the room. He then kicked Ethan's calf. With the powerful force making him unable to stand steadily, Ethan fell down to his knees before Kevin. When he regained his senses, Ethan flew into a rage and roared, Kevin, are you for real? In his mind, how could the young heir of the most powerful family in New York City be forced to kneel on the ground in front of so many people? If this matter was exposed to the public, not only would it cause him a lot of embarrassment, but the entire Williams family would also be ridiculed for it. Do you finally understand that I'm not playing around? Kevin looked down at him with disgust. He then declared, Don't say that I didn't give you a chance. As long as you apologize for what happened to Emo and beg for mercy right now, I will spare your life for the sake of your father."
"Kevin, are you crazy? You want me to do what? Dream on,"
Ethan replied. Although he was afraid of Kevin, he still couldn't stomach lowering his pride. If Ethan agreed to his terms, how could he show his face to his father in the future? It seems like you were forcing me to make another move," Kevin replied disappointedly. Without wasting any more time, he then threw a punch right at Ethan's face. As he lay on the ground, Ethan's face was instantly swollen, with blood flowing out of his mouth and nose. "Do you want me to knock you out or not?" Kevin asked coldly.
"That's impossible,"
Ethan responded. He was sure that Kevin would at most rough him up a bit today. After all, they were still family at the end of the day. He wouldn't dare to do anything that would truly injure him, would he? "Those words will soon be proved wrong," Kevin replied. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in his eyes as he stepped on one of Ethan's legs. A loud cracking sound was then heard, causing Ethan to scream at the top of his lungs. His face turned red, and bulging veins appeared on his forehead. However, Kevin ignored that and kept applying pressure on Ethan's leg. This made Ethan howl even more as his face twisted and turned from the intense pain.
"Kevin, you piece of trash. If you really have the guts, kill me today, or else I will definitely get back at you for today's humiliation several times over in the future,"
Ethan warned furiously. He then grabbed Kevin's leg with both hands, seemingly wanting to bite it. Unfortunately, his face was swollen so badly that he couldn't even close his mouth completely. "I'm afraid you won't have that chance," Kevin said as he bent down and grabbed Ethan's shirt. After dragging him to the window, he declared, "You're going to jump down yourself." Upon hearing this, Ethan felt like his soul was about to leave his body. With cold sweat drenching his entire back, he shook his head and refused.
"Kevin, are you crazy? We're on the 14th floor."
"I know. Jump," Kevin ordered without giving any further explanation. "If you can survive, then it's the universe's way of telling me that your life should be spared, and I will no longer be your enemy for the rest of my life. Otherwise, it's a sign that you deserve to die." Everyone present was suddenly frightened. Looking at Kevin's gloomy face, even Adriana Wright and Gilbert Rhodes felt horror. At the moment, Kevin seemed to have a terrifying aura that made them feel very anxious. Standing by the window, Ethan glanced down slightly. He immediately felt dizzy and his legs trembled in fear. How could he survive after jumping from this height? Even if he miraculously did, in what state would his mind and body be?
"Okay, I'll jump."
Ethan stuttered as he held onto the windowsill, but almost immediately after he desperately shouted,
"Dalton, you bastard! Aren't you going to save me? Kevin has gone crazy."
"No one can save you today," Kevin said coldly. "I have always known that you were a bully who used the William family's prestige to get what you wanted, but I never thought that you would have the guts to act on your own. What gave you the courage to come to Chicago and stir up trouble all of a sudden? Was it the fact that I wasn't here?" At the moment, Kevin really wanted to kill Ethan, not only to avenge Emo Squire and the others, but also as a reminder to everyone else who thought that his absence from Chicago meant that his empire here could be easily trampled. No matter where he was, any bold act against the Williams Company and the people he cared about would not be tolerated. Faced with the reality of death, Ethan's arrogance finally crumbled as he helplessly plopped to the ground.
"Kevin, I was wrong. I shouldn't have made you my enemy. Please don't kill me. I'm too young to die,"
Ethan begged while sobbing uncontrollably. He then added,
"As long as you let me go, I can guarantee that I will never step foot in Chicago ever again."
At the same time, Adriana Wright and the others suddenly stared at him in shock. Ethan was so scared that he had wet his pants. You think that by finally admitting defeat, I will simply let you go now? It's too late for that, Kevin said seriously, then added, You could have had a good life if you stayed in New York City, but you made the mistake of coming here and causing trouble. For that, you must pay the price. Not knowing what else to say to save his life, Ethan buried his head deep into his chest. Was this really the end for him? Now the only thing in front of you is death. Jump and save me the trouble of pushing you, Kevin callously ordered. As his voice fell, the entire room became silent as Lily and the others frowned. While Ethan's fate did not necessarily concern them, they were worried that if he really died in this horrific manner, Kevin would have to be arrested and go to trial, despite being a powerful expert. Just then, Dalton, who had been standing by the door this entire time, suddenly shouted, "Enough!" Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. However, Kevin retorted, "Now that I'm back, that decision is no longer up to you." Staring into each other's eyes created intense sparks, as if both of them wanted to completely crush the other with their gaze. Although they didn't attack each other, the animosity between these two former brothers was as clear as day. "Are you really going to kill Ethan? No matter what, he is still a member of your family. If he dies, you will be in a lot of trouble. Ethan was just the first attacker of many," Dalton pointed out truthfully, then added, "If your empire in Chicago is thrown into chaos before you fully establish yourself in Washington, you will have to face enemies from both the front and the back." Hearing this, Kevin's eyes gradually narrowed as he looked at Dalton. At the same time, Lily and the others were shocked. Dalton's words sounded like he was not only trying to save Ethan, but also warning Kevin not to get in his way. "Besides, you won't be able to kill him today. After all, Ethan and I are partners now." While saying this, Dalton took 2 steps forward. His body then began to emit a bright blue light. "6th stage of level 5, Kevin observed with some surprise. "Although my power base hasn't improved as quickly as yours, I think it should be more than enough to protect Ethan today," Dalton responded very casually, as if Kevin wasn't a threat to him. Kevin knew very well that Dalton's power base had originally come from Travis Adams, the late head of the Myriads. But at the time, his strength was only at the 3rd stage of level 5 at most. In his absence, how was Dalton able to find sufficient training opportunities and medicinal pills to reach the 6th stage so soon? Seeing that Kevin remained silent, Ethan managed to smile despite the pain that he was feeling. "Kevin, aren't you going to kill me? Why aren't you attacking? Did you suddenly realize that you can't defeat Dalton? You may look strong on the outside, but you're weak on the inside after all," Ethan sneered. "Shut up, you bastard," Dalton scolded Ethan harshly. While Ethan and the others might not realize their gap in strength, Dalton knew better than to challenge Kevin one-on-one. "It seems like you have encountered an incredible opportunity," Kevin remarked with deep meaning. "Whether I did or not is none of your business. Now, are you going to let Ethan go or not?" Dalton said, maintaining his calm. "All right, I'll let him live for now," Kevin immediately said. "But while he can escape death, it doesn't mean that he can avoid punishment." Before the others could understand what he meant, Kevin had already made a move and broken all 4 of Ethan's limbs. Ethan did not even have time to beg or scream before he fainted from the pain. Seeing this, Dalton's eyelids twitched a few times. He could see it more clearly than anyone else. With the amount of force that Kevin used to crush all of Ethan's limbs, such an injury could not be cured even with the most advanced medical technologies in the world. Similar to Emo Squire's case, only a high-grade medicinal pill would give him the chance to live normally again. "Take him away. As for you, we will settle our score some other time," Kevin said with a slight smile on his face. Despite the anger in his heart, Dalton did not dawdle. He immediately walked toward Ethan, lifted his unconscious body off the floor, and carried him on his back. After they left, Adriana Wright and the others let out a huge sigh of relief. Gilbert Rhodes then walked up to Kevin and asked with a pleading look in his eyes, "Kevin, can you save Emo?" "Don't worry. I have something that can help him," Kevin reassured as he took out a pill from his pocket. This was a grade 7 medicinal pill that he had previously refined in case he or someone would need it. Since it had the ability to heal any type of injury, he handed it over to Gilbert without any hesitation. "Just give it to him as soon as he wakes up." Kevin smiled meaningfully as he swept his eyes over them. "I know that things have been extremely hard on all of you during my absence." "I'm sorry, Kevin. We failed to live up to your expectations. We even dragged you down along with us." Adriana lowered her head and apologized. "Nonsense. You guys aren't just my business associates. We've gone through so much together over the years that I see you all as family." Kevin took a deep breath and added, "You guys should head back home and rest for a while. Emo will be taken care of by the people that I brought with me. Tonight, I'm inviting you all to come to the Salix Leaf Complex. Let's all have a meal together." After finishing speaking, Kevin walked over to Lily, held her hand, and then pulled her out of the room with him. Those who remained inside did not follow to leave some space for the couple to catch up after not seeing each other for a long time. The two did not go too far as they just slowly walked around the hospital. Suddenly, Kevin stopped in his tracks and turned around to face her. "Lily, do you have anything that you want to tell me?" Kevin could not help but break the silence. "No. As long as you've come back safe and sound, that's all that matters," Lily replied while burying her head even deeper into his chest. Seeing this, Kevin uttered, "I have something to tell you. I have missed you so much while I was away." As Kevin spoke, he leaned sideways and hugged her gently. Suddenly, Lily's face turned red. However, her hands held Kevin's waist, revealing the true thoughts and feelings in her heart. The two of them just stood there and hugged each other without saying anything for some time. It was as if thousands of words could not replace the warmth of their loving embrace. At the same time, news of Kevin's return swept across Chicago like wildfire. When everyone heard that he had crippled Ethan Williams without any explanation, their hearts were filled with shock and horror. Those who had been thinking of trying to bring down the Williams Company suddenly had a change of heart. Perhaps it was better after all to be working with Kevin, if for no other reason than to save themselves from having their own bones shattered. While Kevin eventually agreed to let Ethan Williams go, he broke all 4 of his limbs to teach him a lesson before telling Dalton Steele to take him away. Knowing that Kevin was still much more powerful than he was, Dalton had no choice but to comply. When they left, Kevin handed Gilbert Rhodes a grade 7 medicinal pill to cure Emo Squire's injuries and invited everyone over to the Salix Leaf Complex for a meal later that night. Kevin then pulled Lily aside to patch things up with her as the shocking news of his return and Ethan's fate spread all over Chicago. In another private hospital in Chicago, Thomas Williams stood beside a hospital bed with a gloomy face. Lying on the bed was Ethan, who was currently wrapped in casts from head to toe, and there were several IV bags hanging beside him. A couple of hours ago, Thomas was in New York City discussing a business deal when he received a call from an unknown number, telling him that something had happened to Ethan. Thomas's first reaction at that time was that it was impossible. After all, despite being aware that his son was not in New York, his wife Laura had told him that Ethan had simply gone on a vacation. In fact, the day that Ethan left, Thomas felt that it was better for him to go away for a little while rather than to stay in New York City and cause trouble every day. Given this, the last thing that he expected was for his son to go to Chicago and recklessly go after Kevin.
Please calm your anger, Mr. Williams. What matters most right now is that your son is still alive.
Dalton Steele tried to comfort him as he stood by the window in Ethan's hospital room. Dalton then told him everything that had happened since Ethan arrived in Chicago. Hearing all of this, Thomas clenched his fist so tightly that his nails were about to pierce through his skin.
If there's nothing else, I'll leave now.
But just as Dalton reached the door, he stopped. Without turning his head, he then advised,
Kevin is a sleeping giant whose power base has become stronger than ever. Right now, he is not someone that the Williams family can afford to go up against, so Ethan should consider himself extremely lucky that his life was spared. In the future, I hope that you and your family won't do something that you'll end up regretting," he added. "Besides, don't you want Kevin to return to the Williams family at some point in the future? If you play your cards right and Kevin agrees to your terms, don't let your arrogant son jeopardize everything." After saying this, Dalton left the hospital room. If Adriana Wright and the others had heard this, they would definitely be confused. Why would Dalton try to persuade Thomas Williams not to take revenge for his son? Judging from the current situation in Chicago, Dalton and Kevin were like water and fire. How could he help his enemy in this regard? After all, if Dalton were to add fuel to the fire and exaggerate this matter by pinning all of the blame on Kevin, he would definitely be able to convince the Williams family to side with him. If that happened, Kevin's Chicago empire would become even more difficult to protect. At that moment, Thomas took a deep breath and looked at his son on the bed with some sympathy for his suffering, but with rage in his heart. Back at the Salix Leaf Complex, Kevin and the others were gathered together. Under the effect of Kevin's grade 7 medicinal pill, all of the injuries across Emo Squire's body had begun to miraculously heal. When he got out of bed and left the hospital under his own power, he shocked all of the doctors and nurses in the hospital. "Kevin, I will never forget the kindness you showed by saving my life. Right now, I can only give you a toast to express my gratitude to you. Cheers." Emo offered as he slowly raised his wine glass with a smile on his face. He was clearly in a very good mood tonight. Not only did he nearly fully recover from his injuries in a short amount of time, but he also heard from Gilbert Rhodes that Kevin had broken Ethan's arms and legs. Although the Steel Group was the one that put pressure on the Williams Company, Ethan had played a very important role in all of it by making them suffer. So Emo couldn't help but feel that some sense of justice had been served. Kevin smiled back and stretched out his hand, pressing Emo's wine glass down. He then raised his own glass and looked around to address everyone. "I should be the one making a toast for you guys. In my absence, you have all worked hard to stabilize my company while taking care of Lily. So I owe you all an enormous debt of gratitude. Thank you so much for your trust and support." "Kevin, don't say that. It is only right for us to do what we did. After all, without your help, we wouldn't have become what we are today. Besides, your wife has been doing a tremendous job stabilizing the Williams Company. At most, we only gave her some simple advice and assistance." Adriana Wright replied sincerely. "That's right, Kevin. We really can't accept all of the praise that you have given us," Gilbert also added. Kevin could not help but look at Lily when he heard this. At that moment, Lily was also looking at him and her face was slightly red. "Lily, thank you for all of your hard work. I truly appreciate everything that you've done for me." Kevin did not say much, but his simple words were full of apology to Lily. Even with Lily's experience managing her family business when the Jones family was at its peak, their strength was not even a fraction of the Williams Company's power now. Given this, Kevin could only imagine how difficult it had been for her to manage the most powerful company in Chicago. "Actually, I didn't really do much. With the help of Emo and the others, I mostly just had to sign some documents," Lily uttered as she lowered her head shyly. Deep down, her heart was filled with pride. All right. As Kevin mentioned, we are all family, so there is no need for us to flatter each other too much. Besides, aren't we here to eat tonight? I'm starving." Emo couldn't help but tease. The meal lasted for nearly 3 hours. During this time, Kevin introduced Kyle Thompson and Marcus Watford to the others. Then they talked about the current situation in Chicago as Kevin more or less understood how Dalton had made things difficult for them in his absence. At the same time, Emo and the others didn't ask him anything about his activities in Washington. They all knew that it wasn't a matter that they could participate in. Having drunk a lot of wine over the course of their meal, all of Kevin's guests had to be helped back to their respective homes by their bodyguards. Despite this, Emo and the others were not worried.
Instead, they were full of excitement. Now that Kevin was back, they no longer had to fear Dalton. As Kevin tucked Lily into bed, he revealed a sincere smile and said, "Leave the rest to me. Although I can't stay for too long, I will definitely pave a smooth road for you." After Lily had fallen asleep, Kevin went to the balcony. Despite the extremely cold wind at this time of the year, it didn't have much effect on him as he took out his phone and dialed a number. Soon, a cautious voice came from the other end of the phone.
"Mr. Williams, is that you?"
"Yes, it's me," Kevin said immediately. Now that Spencer and Derek had gone to Washington and brought along the Hill siblings with them, the matters of the Radiants were mostly handed over to the Dixon brothers. As for Elijah Tanner and his brothers, they had yet to come out of seclusion.
"Mr. Williams, you finally called. I thought you had already forgotten about us,"
Alfred Dixon exclaimed. "Don't be so overdramatic. Anyway, I have something to ask you. Have you heard anything unusual happening near Lake Erie?" Kevin got straight to the point and asked. After all, he did not come back to Chicago just to reunite with Lily and the others. With the sky-dividing flower believed to be somewhere in some ancient ruins near or beneath Lake Erie, Kevin was sure that, aside from the Mavericks, there could be others who were after the same thing. So who could guarantee that he would get what they wanted? Given this, Kevin did not want to put in so much effort just to explain to the Mavericks that he had failed his mission. Hearing Kevin's question, Alfred was stunned at first. He then thought for a while before remembering something.
"Yes. According to some of my people, an area surrounding Lake Erie was suddenly sealed off 3 days ago. I heard that some kind of ancient ruins were discovered there. And when this news came out, 16 schools from the Great Powers immediately sent out their men. In order to avoid alarming the public, the government sealed off the area and imposed a media blackout about this matter,"
Alfred reported. 16 schools? Why would so many great powers suddenly mobilize their forces? Kevin asked in shock.
Alfred asked back in surprise. "Mr. Williams, do you really not know anything about this matter?"
"Know what? Stop beating around the bush and just tell me," Kevin scolded.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. Anyway, according to the information that we gathered, a legendary figure known as the Water Guardian used to protect the depths of Lake Erie. His power base enabled him to defend the area for many years without suffering a single defeat. One day he mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind the recently discovered ancient ruins at the bottom of Lake Erie. However, despite his elusive nature, he is said to still protect those waters," Alfred explained.
"The Water Guardian?" Kevin uttered as he frowned slightly. This was the first time he had heard of the Water Guardian. If there really was such a legendary figure, why didn't he come across any relevant records about him in the past? "Where did you get this information from, exactly?" Kevin immediately asked.
"The Great Powers were actually informed about the Water Guardian by the government officials in charge of sealing off the lake. As for whether the legend is true or false, there is no way to verify it now. Even if there really is such a figure, any records must have long been washed away by the tide of history," Alfred related. "All right. Bring a few people over to Chicago tomorrow. You will come with me to Lake Erie to see whether this so-called Water Guardian is real or not." After saying this, Kevin hung up the phone. Kevin had a bad feeling in his heart. The great powers who had heard about the ancient ruins and swiftly took action, the sudden threat of the Water Guardian, as well as the government officials who had taken the initiative to warn them about the presence of this elusive figure, all made him uneasy. Given the timing of it all, Kevin kept feeling that these were all strangely connected, but at the moment, he was unable to think clearly enough to figure things out. The night passed quickly. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Ethan Williams slowly opened his eyes. The first thing that he saw was Thomas Williams's grim face staring back at him. Thomas had been in the hospital room with his son since yesterday. As he sat by Ethan's bedside and waited for him to wake up, he had not slept. Ethan's nose suddenly twitched as he pleaded with a sobbing tone. "Dad, you must avenge me. That piece of trash, Kevin, he..." Ethan's words were filled with despair.
Back in New York City, he had always been the one to bully others. Now that the tables had turned on him in Chicago, how could he accept it?
"Shut up, you ignorant fool!"
Thomas roared as his originally expressionless face suddenly turned ferocious. Stunned by his father's scolding, Ethan called out in disbelief, "Dad!" Although things between them had been especially tense of late, Ethan was still Thomas Williams' son. Given this, after finding out that Ethan had suffered such a serious injury, he shouldn't have started cursing the moment his son woke up, right?
"Do you know what you have done? Your actions have undoubtedly pushed the Williams family over the edge of a cliff and into the abyss."
Thomas reprimanded him harshly and then added,
"You know it wouldn't be such a loss to our family if you had just died. So you should be grateful that you're still alive." "Dad, what are you talking about? Since I'm your son, shouldn't you be on my side no matter what? Besides, this was all Kevin's fault, so that piece of trash must die,"
Ethan argued.
"You still have the nerve to call others trash. Why don't you take a good look at yourself? Anyway, the only reason why I stayed here until you woke up was to tell you that this matter ends here. I've already arranged for someone to bring you back to New York City immediately. I will deal with you then."
After saying these words, Thomas turned around and left the ward. Very soon, a nurse entered and pushed Ethan's bed out of the hospital room. When Kevin received the news that they had left Chicago, he just shook his head and turned a blind eye. As the saying goes, blood is thicker than water. Although he had been expelled from his family, at the end of the day, he wouldn't do anything to destroy them. This was also the main reason why he ultimately decided to spare Ethan's life. But even Kevin wondered if that was a decision that might prove fatal in the future. After calling Alfred Dixon to ask about the ancient ruins in Lake Erie, Kevin learned that not only did he have to compete against several schools from the great powers, but the government had also issued a warning about the Water Guardian, a so-called legendary figure who protected its waters. When Ethan Williams finally woke up the next morning and saw Thomas by his bedside, Thomas scolded him for putting the Williams family at risk with his actions. He then arranged for Ethan's immediate return to New York City, unaware that Kevin had already decided against destroying his own family. Back at the Salix Leaf Complex, Lily slowly walked downstairs to the kitchen. When Kevin saw her, he put away his phone and eagerly went up to ask with concern, "Good morning. Are you still feeling dizzy from last night?" As Lily looked at the flattering smile on Kevin's face, it was as if she had returned to a year ago, when Kevin was still just an ordinary person and did not have any ambitions or responsibilities outside of being her husband. Although he did not have any special abilities, he could always stay by her side and take care of her. However, this illusion only appeared for a moment before Lily regained her senses and drifted back to reality. "I still feel a little hungover. What are we eating this morning?" Lily yawned and went to sit at the dining table. "I made us some oatmeal as well as bacon, eggs, and toast," Kevin exclaimed as he proudly showed off his dishes as if he were the head chef of a 3-star restaurant. Although there was nothing special about any of these dishes, they were all personally cooked by him. Because of this, Lily nodded her head excitedly and immediately drank some of the coffee that Kevin handed over to her. Lily was the first to break the silence and asked with some hesitation, "When are you going to leave again?" Given Kevin's current ambitions, it was almost impossible to keep him at home for long. Moreover, even if he wanted to stay, one of his enemies would surely draw him out. "In a few days," Kevin replied as he finished his eggs, then added, "But before that, I have to go to the Williams Company and make sure that you'll have the means to fight Dalton in the future." "What exactly is going on between you and Dalton anyway? Weren't the two of you extremely close?" Lily could not help but ask. Hearing this, Kevin, who was about to get up and pick up their plates and bowls, suddenly froze. "Dalton and I had some sort of misunderstanding that can't really be explained in just a few words." Kevin then looked at Lily seriously and continued, "Just promise me one thing. Once the Williams Company secures the upper hand over the Steele Group, don't forget to show mercy." While Lily did not understand Kevin's reasons for saying this, she still nodded in agreement. After he washed the dishes, the two of them got ready and drove to the Williams Company. As soon as they parked and got out of the car, Kevin heard a voice calling Lily from nearby. When he turned around, he saw a man in a gray suit quickly walking toward Lily with a face full of joy. He then took out a light blue gift box and beamed. "Lily, I bought this gift for you yesterday. I hope you like it." As he observed this person, Kevin's eyes narrowed at how he was being unusually attentive to Lily. Lily hesitantly looked at Kevin and asked, "Do you think I should accept it or not?" Hearing this, the man's expression changed slightly. He then shifted his gaze toward Kevin, who he had already noticed earlier, but did not think much of until now. "Lily, is this?" the man asked with a fake smile. "I'm her husband. Who are you?" Kevin immediately took over the conversation and asked back. However, the man simply raised his eyebrows at Kevin and snorted. "Oh, please. You must be—" "What the hell are you talking about? I really am Lily's husband. I asked you who you are," Kevin demanded. Seeing his displeasure, Lily stepped in and explained. "Kevin, relax. He's my college classmate, Colin Butterfield. He just came back from Europe and is now working for our company." Of course, there were still some things that she had not said out loud. Colin madly pursued her during their college days. But after he decided to finish his studies abroad, he abruptly left Chicago and only returned recently. When Colin came back, he tracked down Lily, hoping to win her heart. It just so happened that the Williams Company needed a talented manager, and Lily agreed to hire him based on his credentials. "So, is this employee working directly under you?" Kevin frowned slightly. Although he did not say anything else, his meaning was very clear. "What did you say? Who are you calling an employee?" Colin retorted unhappily, then added, "Don't think that you are superior to me just because you're married to Lily. After all, everything can change in an instant." Kevin's face instantly darkened upon hearing this. Who did this guy think he was? Seeing that things had become tense between the two of them, Lily warned Colin. "Colin, you better watch your mouth. Kevin is my husband, and he is definitely not someone that you can afford to offend if you want to stay in this company." Colin looked at Kevin in disbelief. He then pulled Lily aside and whispered, "Lily, how can you stay married to this piece of trash? Tell me, what part of me is not as good as him? My feelings for you have never changed since college. Don't you feel the same way?" "I'm sorry, Colin, but you were never more than a friend to me," Lily told him. At the same time, she kept cursing Colin Butterfield in her heart. What was he thinking? Across the entire city, not even Dalton Steele would dare to speak to Kevin in such a manner. Colin might have just returned to Chicago, but that wasn't an excuse. After all, he should have known who the president of the company that he was working for was. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept no for an answer." Colin refused as he furiously roared at Kevin. "I don't care who you are. Leave Lily immediately. If not, don't blame me for what I'll do to you." "Colin, are you out of your mind? What has gotten into you?" Lily scolded as her face turned sour. "Call me crazy, but I'm willing to do anything to win your heart. Besides, just look at him. I am clearly way stronger than this guy. I can take him in a fight," Colin arrogantly pointed out. As his voice grew louder with each response, the argument attracted the attention of people in the parking lot. At first, they were wondering who was so blind to provoke Colin Butterfield. But when they got closer, they were shocked to see Colin throwing insults at Kevin like a madman.
Does that guy have a death wish? What is he doing getting entangled with President Williams? Someone wondered. While Colin's feelings for Lily were not a secret to many of these people, they couldn't believe that he would actually confront Lily's husband, who just so happened to be the Williams Company's president. "Colin, you have left me with no choice but to fire you. Pack up your things and leave," Lily declared. In her mind, Colin had crossed the line the moment he revealed his crazed obsession with her. Moreover, when she saw Kevin's gloomy face, Lily knew very well that if Colin were to keep insulting him, he would be lucky just to leave the parking lot alive. "Lily,
Are you really going to fire me for this? Colin was stunned. I am not only firing you, but from now on, don't bother me anymore. Otherwise, I'll have to get a restraining order on you for stalking and harassment. Lily threatened as she held Kevin's hand and left the parking lot with him. Hearing this, Colin Butterfield helplessly watched her go as a couple of security guards approached. Despite this, Kevin's expression did not change even after they arrived at his office. When they noticed this, Rachel and the others looked at each other in puzzlement, but none of them dared to ask what had happened. Is everyone here? Kevin asked with a cold tone. Yes, Kevin. The higher-ups of the Williams Company and others from our business group are all here as well. They're waiting for us in the new conference room. Emo Squire bit the bullet and carefully replied. Kevin simply nodded as he took out his phone and sent a text message. Then he left the office first. While having dinner last night, Kevin had asked Emo and the others to summon all of these people here today for a meeting. If Dalton Steele was bold enough to proceed with his plans to launch an attack against Kevin, he would likely target all of the members of his business consortium in one fell swoop. If this happened, the entire power structure of Chicago could potentially be reordered. To protect his interests, Kevin wanted to set up a new core business. As the Williams Company's strength grew stronger, the scale of their meetings also expanded. Because of this, the entire 16th floor had now been converted into a giant conference room. At the moment, the room was filled with people who all remained silent, knowing that Kevin had called this meeting. They didn't even dare to take out their phones. When Kevin and the others finally came in, everyone stood up at the same time to greet him. After looking around the conference room, Kevin sat down at the head of the table. Not wanting to waste any time, he immediately announced, I know that things have been hard on everyone recently. Given this, the main reason why I have gathered all of you together today is to tell you about my plan to set up an herbal pill refinery. Of course, this will be spearheaded by the Williams Company, while everyone else will be supporting key shareholders. Now, I would like to hear your opinions on this exciting new venture. When his voice fell, all of the business club's higher-ups, including Emo Squire and the others, were shocked. Although the Williams Company would take out a small batch of pills and put them up for auction every once in a while, these were exclusive events reserved for the wealthiest and most influential figures of Chicago. By keeping the supply low, it was not only easier for the company to manage, but the auction also earned them large profits due to the high demand. But now that Kevin actually wanted to set up a permanent pill refinery, how could it not be shocking? The originally quiet conference room instantly became lively as everyone started discussing this news. Suddenly, a senior director of the Williams Company stood up and asked tentatively, President Williams, although your idea is very interesting, I have a question. Kevin glanced at him and replied indifferently, Just say it. Everyone knows that the country's herbal pill supply is basically monopolized by the Herbalist Society. If we suddenly set up a rival company that refines the same type of pills, wouldn't that be a thorn in their side? The man pointed out their concerns. A look of surprise flashed across Kevin's eyes. He then explained, You don't have to worry too much about that. Anyway, most of the pills that the Herbalist Society refines are actually catered for experts who wish to increase their strength. In contrast, we will not be doing any of that. Instead, our company will only refine pills that can cure diseases and injuries. So it's basically natural medicine for ordinary people.
President Williams, I have another question.
Another person stood up, but this time it was one of Emo Squire's associates.
In setting up this pill refinery, we will need a large number of herbalists. As far as I know, the cost of hiring an herbalist is very high. Many of them are already working for the Herbalist Society. Beyond this issue, the most important aspect to consider is that we will need a lot of pill formulas.
You don't have to worry about that either. Did you think that I was just sitting here and talking nonsense with you this entire time? Of course, I already considered those problems and have resolved them. Kevin calmly reassured, then added. Also, the purpose of calling everyone here today is to simply inform you about this matter. This pill refinery will be established no matter what. Perhaps you can only see the problems now, but I promise that you will all reap endless benefits from this in the future." Some of the higher-ups wanted to respond, but could see that Kevin had made up his mind, so they held their concerns. "If there's nothing else, you can all leave now. Once everything is already underway, I will naturally inform you. In the meantime, please prepare yourselves. I expect your full support on this new venture, so don't drag me down when the time comes," Kevin stated. After the other higher-ups left, Emo Squire and the others could no longer sit still. "Kevin, are you really serious about setting up a pill refinery?" Rachel asked in disbelief. As an ordinary person, she had always felt that the matter of refining medicinal pills was too out of reach. However, she never expected Kevin to present such an opportunity before them. Hearing this, Kevin replied confidently, "Of course I'm serious. In line with this, I have already asked Sandra to anticipate a group of people who will arrive in Chicago shortly. Given this, you must take care and make arrangements for them when the time comes. As long as we play our cards right, our strength will be unmatched in the future." Despite still being displeased over his and Lily's encounter with Colin Butterfield, Kevin had to set aside these feelings to hold a business meeting. Amid concerns that this would be a challenge to the Herbalist Society's control of the herbal market, Kevin calmed those fears and informed his underlings that the venture was necessary to protect their empire from Dalton Steele's plans to topple the Williams Company. Kevin wasn't just bragging when he claimed the herbal pill refinery would make the Williams Company omnipotent. Although Rachel and the others were not strong enough to fight Dalton Steele, Kevin was still firmly in charge of the situation in Chicago. At the same time, he also understood one thing. Despite already having branches in St. Louis and Detroit, the Radiance would not be able to go far in the future if the majority of its members continued to develop in seclusion. However, given that the current number of people in the Radiance had grown to such a massive scale, Kevin could only choose a portion of them to serve as the core members of the organization. By sending these people to help him with his pill refinery, he believed that his ability to protect his empire would be more than enough. After sending Emo Squire and the others away, Kevin followed Lily back to the office. "Don't you have some explaining to do?" Kevin remarked unhappily. "If you won't believe me anyway, it's useless for me to say anything," Lily retorted as she sat on the sofa with her head slightly lowered. Deep down, Kevin knew that Lily was right. After all, even when he was still just a nobody, she never did anything to let him down. Now that his status had soared to the sky, it was even more impossible for Lily to cheat on him. However, while Kevin knew that Colin Butterfield wasn't a threat, he naturally couldn't help but feel a little jealous as Lily's husband. Looking at Lily sulking on the sofa, Kevin could only take a deep breath and try to regain his composure. At the same time, in the Williams family's mansion in New York City, Thomas Williams had just finished reading some reports. But before he could move on to another document, the door of his study was suddenly thrown open forcefully from the outside. His wife, Laura, quickly walked in and placed her hands on her waist. She then scolded, "What the hell, Thomas? Your son was just beaten within an inch of his life by Kevin in Chicago, and yet you did nothing to avenge him. Also, why did you have him brought back here instead of leaving him in the hospital to recover? What are you trying to do?" Hearing this, Thomas slowly put the documents down on the table and stood up as he looked at Laura calmly. "What are you still standing there for? I don't care how strong Kevin is. Take someone with you to Chicago right now and kill that piece of trash. Otherwise, if you don't man up, I won't hesitate to demand a divorce. I can't afford to be humiliated like this." Laura shouted loudly, not caring whether she would be heard by others inside the mansion or not. Overhearing this commotion, a number of people who had originally come to talk to Thomas suddenly stopped in their tracks and did not dare to move forward toward the study. Seeing this, Thomas slowly walked to the door and gestured for them to wait for him down the hall. After making sure that there was no one else around, he discreetly closed the door. "Why did you close the door? Are you afraid of being heard and humiliated?" Laura sneered as she gave Thomas a disdainful look. Without saying a word, Thomas walked back to his desk, took out a document from the drawer, and handed it over to Laura. "What's this?" Laura frowned and asked in puzzlement. "Take a look at your son's injury report," Thomas uttered coldly. "Why? I already know that all of Ethan's limbs were broken, and I'm even aware that his spiritual energy was forcibly sucked out of his body. What else is there to see?" Laura wondered as her eyes widened even more. "Are you sure you didn't miss anything? I think you should take another look, especially at your son's blood type." Thomas's face gradually turned cold as he spoke. Just then, Laura's facial expression changed dramatically. She covered her mouth with both hands to prevent herself from making any sound. "Shouldn't you give me a good explanation? I remember Ethan's blood test results in the past. His blood type was always the same as mine. Why did it suddenly change?" Thomas asked, creating a tense atmosphere around them. "Thomas, listen to me. It's probably just a clerical error. After all, hospitals in Chicago aren't as good as the ones in New York City. There's no need to get upset over such a small thing." Laura immediately deflected with a panicked tone. "Is that so? Well, I have something else here that you should take a look at," Thomas replied as he took out another document and handed it to Laura. When Laura saw what it was, her hand started to tremble. "When I noticed that Ethan's blood type did not match with mine, I immediately asked someone to do a DNA test for us. The result confirmed that my suspicions were correct." Thomas snickered, then continued. "Laura, I really can't believe that you managed to fool me for so many years. How dare you hand me the responsibility of raising a son that isn't my own? If it wasn't for the fact that Ethan had been hospitalized, you probably would have carried this secret to your grave." No, Thomas, you misunderstood. The hospital must have made a mistake. Ethan is really your son. Don't you know how much I love you? How could I do something that would betray your trust like that?" Laura quickly tried to reassure him. However, Thomas acted as if he did not hear what she said and recounted. "Last night, I sat by Ethan's bedside for the whole night and remembered something. Back when we first met, I had to compete with another man to win your heart. I always thought I defeated him, but in the end, I guess he got the best of me. He managed to get you pregnant, then made me raise his son for more than 20 years. Thomas's emotions suddenly got the best of him as he slammed his palms on the desk. Due to his spiritual energy, the desk was instantly smashed into pieces. This scared Laura so badly that her heart started racing. With that, Thomas thundered, "I finally understand why you kept insisting that I arrange for Ethan to take over the family business, and also pressured me into banishing my brother and his family. This was all a part of your grand plan to pave the way for your son to inherit everything. If you had succeeded with all of that, what were you planning to do next? Were you going to kill me, then marry your son's real father?" As Thomas slowly walked toward Laura, his body was trembling more and more violently. At the same time, he emitted a terrifying aura, looking as if he was on the verge of losing control. "Thomas, don't be impulsive. Why don't you calm down so we can talk?" Laura pleaded in fear. "You lied to me for over 20 years, Laura. How do you expect me to calm down after that?" Thomas yelled. As Laura stepped backward to avoid him, she stumbled over her own feet and fell to the ground in a sorry state. When this happened, Thomas suddenly turned around and shouted toward the door, "Someone, come here right now." A few seconds later, a few of his bodyguards entered the study. Upon seeing Thomas angrily staring down at Laura, who was sitting on the ground, these men froze in their tracks. "Get her out of this house right now. No matter what happens, she can never come back here," Thomas ordered without any further explanation. For a moment, the bodyguard stood there blankly, not knowing what to say or do. Could Thomas Williams really do this to his own wife? Where would Laura go after being kicked out of the Williams family's mansion?
Didn't you hear what I said? Take her away right now, Thomas ordered his men harshly.
Hearing this, the bodyguards immediately came back to their senses and did not dare to question Thomas. They then dragged Laura from the study. "What the hell are you doing? Let go of me right this instant. My husband didn't mean what he said. He was clearly just caught up in the heat of the moment." Laura tried to explain as she struggled with all of her might to free herself. Unfortunately, her strength was no match for these men. When the sound of Laura's desperate pleas was already too far away for him to hear, Thomas slowly closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. He was clearly unhappy right now with what he had just done. As his wife, Laura was the woman whom he had loved for more than 20 years. However, given that their marriage was built on one huge lie, he couldn't find it in his heart to forgive her. After all, beyond the fact that he had been led to believe that Ethan was his son this entire time, all of the advice that she had whispered into his ear over the years had left the entire Williams family practically covered in bruises and scars. After some time, Thomas suddenly opened his eyes, as if he had made some important decision. He then yelled, "Prepare the car. I'm going to Chicago."